بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى صحبه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد أن هديتنا، وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة. ربنا افتح بيننا وبين قومنا بالحق، وأنت خير الفاتحين. ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك، ولا تخزنا يوم الدين. ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير. ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. سبحانك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, this is the first Usuli Khutbah from the new Usuli headquarters. May Allah make this place blessed. May Allah protect this place. May Allah accept this place in Allah's service. May it always be an agent of goodness. May this place be a place of service for the good of all Muslims and for the well-being and goodness of Islam. Until the final day. This new place was made possible by the donations of the supporters of Usuli. May Allah bless all those who contributed to the founding of this place. And may Allah reward them and reward their children and the children of their children. May Allah bless them and bless their progeny. But may this place always be the podium of truth, the podium of transparency, the podium of courage and bravery. May it never be a podium of despotism, a podium of darkness, a podium of cowardliness or miserliness. May Allah accept. May Allah accept. At this moment, my mind goes to 4 scenes, four scenes, four situations from modern contemporary Muslim reality. As I've said many times in the past, reading the present accurately, morally, from a perspective anchored and grounded in taqwa, grounded in full awareness of our presence before the divine, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, full awareness of our accountability, full awareness of our responsibility, full awareness of our covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Reading the present is vesting oneself in the future. Reading the present with all these requirements, being grounded and anchored in truth, in transparency, in bravery, is shaping our future. In the same way that the converse is true, that if you fail to read the present, if you fail to read the present with the requisite bravery, with the requisite transparency, with the requisite responsibility, is failing the future. It is a dynamic that is as stable and real as the equation of mathematics, the equations of mathematics that Allah has engineered in creation, engineered in the created Quran of Khalqillah, Allah's creation. Reading the present is also reading the future. Misreading the present is also misreading the future. It is an illogical impossibility. It is the height of illogicalness. In fact, as I've said before, it is the height of disassociation. It is the height of delusion. Disassociation, the illogical, the delusional. To think that you have any possibility of reading the future without a brave, honest, transparent reading of the present. So, 4 scenarios, 4 moments in history, 4 moments in our present, in our contemporary narrative, and hence 4 telling moments about the possibilities and potentialities of the future. If we read things accurately, we have the possibility of accurately shaping the future. If we do not read things accurately, then also what follows is the very real possibility of misreading our future. Now, right before the khutbah, right before, Israel once again unleashes a monumental, unrestrained, indiscriminate, unhinged attack on a sovereign nation, a sovereign neighbor, Lebanon. Now, of course, what's fascinating and tragic is that at the same time that Israel waged an unhinged, unrestrained strike against Lebanon, a sovereign nation, it also struck against Syria. But Israel strikes against Syria, another sovereign nation, another neighbor of Israel, so often, and the killing of Syrians by Israel happens so frequently that no one notices anymore. So right before the strike against Lebanon, there was a strike against Syria in Damascus that killed 5 reported soldiers, Syrian soldiers. The strike against Lebanon was reportedly a 2,000-ton bomb. And I don't know if it was the only bomb or more than one bomb, but Israel has said that the bomb itself weighed 2,000 tons. Against a neighborhood in Beirut, Israel reportedly said that it was trying to assassinate Hassan Nasrallah. The bomb exploded in a civilian neighborhood, destroying, razing to the ground, taking down completely at least 6 buildings, other than the many other civilian buildings that are damaged. Death toll is unknown, and it is the same repeated logic. Because Israel says that it is after what it considers to be legitimate targets, whether Nasrallah or some other member of Hezbollah, as they have done in Gaza, they have a free hand to kill as many civilians as they wish to achieve whatever objective they declare the objective to be. And importantly and critically, there is no mechanism to hold Israel accountable or to question Israel about its unilateral judgment that it will go after its targets when it wishes, wherever it wishes, in any means it wishes. Israel does not accept accountability before the UN, does not accept accountability before any other agency. including any international tribunal like the International Criminal Court or whatever, Israel considers any interference in its unilateral decision-making process to be illegitimate, and basically says, we do what we want, when we want, and don't dare question us. But I will return to the strike against Lebanon, because that's one scene. This is not, however, where I want to start. And as you will see, all four scenes are interconnected, and indeed, one and the same paradigm. And the paradigm that I am talking about is the paradigm of killing the brown man, the paradigm of killing the dark-skinned human being, the paradigm that has been ongoing, unrestrained, unhampered, uninterrupted since the advent of colonialism. So, what scene should we start with? Well, we should start with right here at home in the United States. Because we had a very telling event that unfolded right here at home. And I'm talking about the execution of Imam Williams. I believe, I paused for a second because his first name escaped me. Is it Marcellus? Marcellus. And I want us to pause for a serious moment. I believe it's Marcellus or Marcellus Williams. For some reason, my mind is going blank as to how to pronounce his first name. But this is a man that was convicted over 20 years ago of a criminal offense of murdering a white woman, a social worker, and a one-time TV reporter. What the authorities said at the time was a robbery gone wrong, burglary, basically a computer stolen, and the woman was stabbed several times. The story is so redundant, so repeated, that it becomes tedious. A black man accused of killing a white woman, as often happens in these trials, especially with the jurisprudence that the Supreme Court has left standing, prosecutors are free to exercise jury strikes based on race. And the Supreme Court, in a number of decisions, has basically left that practice unchallenged. And as often happens in these cases, Initially, there is quite a bit of pressure upon this young man at the time to plead guilty to avoid the death sentence. He insists he's innocent, but confronts the very real possibility, being a black man accused of killing a white woman in a southern state. He knows that conviction is nearly a sure thing, because typically when these cases go to trial, especially white juries convict black men accused of killing white people. And so he eventually agrees to plead no contest. Basically, this is another thing that the Supreme Court said was constitutional, is that no contest basically saying, I am not going to admit guilt, but I am conceding that the state can convict me anyway. Well, Williams agrees to do that after reaching an agreement with the state to plead no contest in return for a life in prison sentence. A new Attorney General challenges the agreement, strikes it, scratches it completely, and insists on Williams going to trial so he can get the death penalty. Well, and again, as often happens in these cases, the evidence against Williams is very circumstantial. There is a jailhouse informant, basically a cellmate to Williams, who himself has a criminal record, wanting a reward of $10,000 for any effort. You get the $10,000 if whatever you do leads to a conviction. So he tells the state that Williams admitted to the crime. Williams at the time has a girlfriend. She also wants the $10,000 reward. So she gives very incriminating evidence, testimony, not physical evidence, just testimony. So basically, a cellmate at jail and the girlfriend testify against Williams, although both of them have criminal records. Both of them have criminal records. And although it is clear that both of them are motivated by a financial incentive, the $10,000 reward, their testimony leads to Williams' conviction. And a white jury hands Williams a death sentence. Why is it a white jury? Well, because the prosecutor struck all black jurors out, challenged all black jurors on the jury, except so it's 11 white people and one black man that convict Williams and give him the death sentence. And as is typical with these cases, over 20 years go by. In the course of these 20 years, both witnesses that testified against Williams pass away. And when the weapon used in the murder is tested, Williams' DNA is not on the weapon. Indeed, not only is Williams' DNA not on the weapon, but it is clear that the instrumentality used in the murder, the knife used in the murder, has been mishandled by the laboratory. It's contaminated because the DNA of the prosecutor and the DNA of a lab worker is found on the knife, but Williams' DNA is not found. There is also a bloody shoe print that is found at the scene of the murder, and this bloody shoe print does not belong to Williams. So there are serious doubts about the culpability of Williams. Williams has always maintained his innocence, has always said that he is innocent. There are serious doubts about his actual culpability, to the extent that something very unusual happens in the case, and that is the prosecutor that originally prosecuted Williams himself joins his appeal, asking for a retrial, if not a retrial, at least for the commuting of the death sentence to a life sentence. It's very unusual for prosecutors to take that step, but it happens in this case. The family of the victim, the family itself, doesn't want Williams to be executed. Nevertheless, despite the doubts about his culpability, despite the fact that the trial was racially contaminated, because all black jurors were excluded from the trial except for one, despite that, both the U.S. Supreme Court and Missouri Supreme Court refused to commute the death sentence or to grant a new trial. Now, in the course of 20 years, Williams converts to Islam. Williams becomes a very devout Muslim. In fact, he becomes an imam in the prison. And critically important, during the course of these more than 20 years, Williams becomes a force for good. There is ample evidence that he works actively and diligently and assertively to guide fellow inmates, to get them to abandon their life of crime, to change their ways, to switch completely from being drug dealers, pimps, murderers, to a totally new human being. Now, if you followed anything about the Williams case, you know that there was thousands of people that appealed to the governor of Missouri to commute the death sentence, not to execute this man, because doubts about his culpability, because of the problems marring the trial, because Williams himself became a completely changed human being. Thousands of people plead with the governor to commute the death sentence, and the governor does not heed any of these calls, and he is executed just this past week. Now, what does this scene tell us? What does it tell us about the brown man, the dark-skinned person. It is a stark reminder of racism. Racism in the United States, racism and its ugly head in our modern history, indeed in the entire colonial modern experience. If you are a dark-skinned person that murders a white person, the chances of getting the death sentence, and there are about 2,000 people on death row right now in the United States, and the statistics bear out what I'm saying, your chances of getting the death sentence are many times what your chances would be if you were a white person murdering a black person. In fact, we don't have many cases of a white person murdering a black person getting the death sentence. As I was following the Williams case, I remembered when I was living in Texas, then Governor Bush, later on becomes Bush the son, the President Bush. Bush, when he was the governor of Texas, I remember a person that was on death row, and the entire civic discourse that was going on at the time was about how this person found Jesus and became a devout Christian and became a reverend and helped guide so many inmates in prison. And Bush, and it was a white person, by the way, it wasn't a black person, commuted, which was, even Bush at the time conceded that this was a very unusual step, but commuted his death sentence to life imprisonment. It made me wonder, in addition to the racism, the religious element, which often becomes wedded with race. What if Williams was a devout Christian instead of a devout Muslim? Why did repeated authorities looking at this case give basically hardly any attention to the fact that Williams has become a changed man in prison, and to his actual record of what in Islam we call islah and reform? His heavily documented record of guiding so many inmates from the time he became an imam. The Republican government of Missouri waved that away with hardly a mention that you are executing not just someone who could very well have been innocent, but you are executing an entirely changed human being altogether. Any effort to understand the death sentence and death penalty and the mechanisms of the state in the United States killing inmates without comprehending the role of race in such executions is mere fantasy and delusion. So what do we get from that scene? The role of race in murder. The role of race even with the rule of law. The role of race in the modern Western and particularly American experience. Okay. So take the second scene. Israel throws a 2,000-ton bomb on a neighborhood in Lebanon. Israel itself doesn't contest that this was a civilian neighborhood. But Israel claims that under the civilian buildings, there is a Hezbollah bunker, and that Hezbollah was meeting in the bunker. Despite the ongoing genocide that has been ongoing for a year, the United States, before Netanyahu authorized the bombing, just one day before, just gave Israel another $8 billion. Israel is never worried about depleting its arsenal because the 2,000-ton bomb came from the United States, the same state that executed Williams. And the United States basically has a carte blanche for Israel. We will give you as many bombs as you want. If your economy is in trouble because of the war, we will take from our taxpayers, from the pockets of our own citizens, and we will give you. And we will give you without any restraint, without limits. And most of our citizens are not troubled by this giving, as most of our citizens are not troubled by how many civilians, including women and children, are killed in the process of pursuing the bad guys. Whether the bad guys are Hamas, or the bad guys are Hezbollah, or the bad guys are Al-Qaeda, or the bad guys are Iraqi resistance, or the bad guys are Syrian army, and what is common consistently to the bad guys is the faceless, dark-skinned human being. The dark-skinned human being cries, and their cries are not heard. The dark-skinned human being narrates, speaks, but their speaking sounds like speaking in tongues, a bunch of noise, hardly worthy of discernment and careful listening. In the same way that the particulars of the Williams case fell on deaf ears, the particulars of the Lebanese, as the particulars of the Palestinians, as they narrate their suffering and their pain and their loss, matters very little. We are accustomed to keep killing the dark-skinned human being without paying much attention to the reality of their suffering. Now, We said that reading the present is making the future. It is very important that as we reflect upon this moment, that we not just notice the racism, but we notice also a few other things. Because the racism is just one. Notice that in the same way, so many, unfortunately, Muslims looked the other way as Israel slaughtered the Palestinians, looked the other way, and in fact went on and on about how Hamas is allied to the Shia in Iran, and hence, somehow, Palestinian suffering doesn't matter. In the same way that is a reality, you will find so many Muslims, unfortunately, who are willing to look away when it comes to the murdering of Lebanese, because, again, of that specter, that ghost, that monster of Shiism. Oh, Israel is striking against the Shia. Now, incidentally, these are the same people who, for an entire year, watched what Hezbollah was doing. Incidentally, let's not forget, Israel is still an occupying power, occupying Lebanese land. And according to international law, although we consider Hezbollah to be a terrorist organization in the United States, according to international law, Hezbollah has a right to fight to liberate its occupied territory. And it is a fact that Israel is occupying Lebanese territory. No matter, but this fact, Muslims are oblivious to, as the white man is oblivious to, because for Muslims, like the white man, we ourselves have learned to divide and separate within, and to look and say, oh, Israel is doing us a favor. Israel is killing Shia. Although these are the very same people who for an entire year looked at what Hezbollah was doing and said, oh, it's an act. In fact, Iran and Hezbollah are allied to Israel. And now that we actually see Israel slaughtering the very people that we said are allied with Israel and performing theater, our narrative is unhinged and our narrative is unbothered by that. And you find these very same people switch from the theater narrative, oh, they're actually just pretending to be enemies, but they're not really enemies, to, well, you know, Israel is killing Shia. What evil does this point to? Racism plus sectarianism plus another very painful reality, one that often goes unnoticed. The logic that Israel and the United States, and indeed Europe in the UN, uses is that Hezbollah has no right to come to the aid of Palestinians because our war with Palestinians doesn't involve the Lebanese. As the logic goes, the Iraqis have no business coming to the aid of Palestinians. The Yemenis have no business coming to the aid of Palestinians. The Iranis have no business coming to the aid of Palestinians because when we attack Gaza, why is it any of their business? So if they come to the aid of Palestinians, we have a right to slaughter them. Now, incidentally, all of us intuitively know that when it comes to the white man, an attack against one is an attack against all. None of us have ever doubted the right of America to come to the aid of the British in World War II. In the same way that none of us have ever doubted the right of the French and the British to come to the aid of the United States in Iraq, although the United States was an aggressor. When it comes to the white man, an attack against one is an attack against all. But when it comes to Muslims and to dark-skinned people, in the same way that the logic of the colonizer was always, when it comes to Indian tribes in the United States, we make peace with one tribe, we oppress another tribe, we massacre a third tribe. Indians never have a right to act collectively as one consciousness. We have a right as white people to act collectively as one consciousness. But the colonized never have a right to act collectively as one consciousness. It is by definition illegitimate. Okay. What ill does this point to? The ailment that has plagued modern Muslims, the delusions of nationalism that Muslims, unfortunately, in the same way that they didn't wake up to the illness of racism, and they didn't wake up to the illness of sectarianism, they embraced the illness of nationalism. And indeed, you find the Saudis speaking as Saudis, the Egyptians speaking as Egyptians. You can attack Syria and Egypt says, that doesn't affect me. And you can attack Lebanon and Jordan says, that doesn't affect me. Mind you, critically, right before the strike against Lebanon, Netanyahu was speaking in the United Nations. And Netanyahu's speech in the United Nations was extremely telling. Right at the moment where he took the decision to obliterate hundreds of Lebanese civilians, to strike a civilian neighborhood. Remember that no one has the right or has the ability to exercise any oversight over when Israel says, we struck X because we're trying to kill terrorists. If Lebanon, if Hezbollah did this, bombed a civilian neighborhood, saying we're trying to kill Israeli military officials, that's terrorism. But when Israel does it, we supply them with weapons and money. Netanyahu, standing in the United Nations, said there's the axis of evil and the axis of good in the Middle East. And he said that the axis of good are the countries that have signed on to the Abrahamic Accords and become a part of the axis of Abraham. Really, really important. What is the axis of Abraham? Saudi Arabia, the Emirates that founded the Abrahamic religion and has a whole headquarters in the Emirates for its Abrahamic Accords and Abrahamic faith, and its agents, and Egypt. So not just our nationalism and our sense of collective consciousness is colonized and co-opted by the white man, but even our faith and our religion. In the same way that the white man decided that Al-Aqsa Mosque is not yours, and that Al-Haramain belong to Saudi Arabia, not you, and that Al Saud will annex the Hijaz, and that the Hijaz no longer exists in any meaningful way except as part of the Saudi state. They also decided you can come together over the Abrahamic faith, whatever that is, and be part of the axis of good, according to Netanyahu, or you can deny that and be part of the axis of evil, and then we can kill you without restraint and without limits. So racism, sectarianism, nationalism will come to the other scenes and what they tell us in the second khutbah, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. اسألوا الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. The fourth scene is particularly painful. At Hajj, I hope all of you heard or know that over 1,300 Muslims were killed because of heat, exhaustion, and thirst. Now again, Muslims have no right, whether in the UN or outside of the UN, right to transparency or accountability. Like all the previous incidents in which Hajj pilgrims have died in mass, 2015, over 2,000 pilgrims died in a stampede, 2,400 or more. No investigation, no transparency, no questions, other than the autocratic, despotic narrative of the Saudi state that said pretty much it's a pilgrim's fault. Now, here again, over 1,300 pilgrims, and the Saudi state that allowed those 1,300 to die from heat and thirst. That's a conservative estimate, by the way. Basically, took no responsibility and said it's the pilgrims' fault because pilgrims come without authorization, without paying the proper dues. But this time, Saudi Arabia went beyond the arrogant dismissal of accountability and responsibility before the Muslim people. Basically, the arrogance is to say, yeah, they're dead, and you have no rights to ask us why did they die, or to investigate, or to hold anyone accountable. You have no say in the matter. They're dead. There was Allah, forget it. This time, Saudi Arabia blamed, and it's mind-blowing. When I saw it, I literally felt like reason and sanity is going to leave me. They published a list of people that they say, the Saudi government says, according to their official flyer, are the murderers of the pilgrims. They labeled them the murderers of the pilgrims. And in fact, published wanted posters. Who are these people? Well, I don't have time to tell you, to properly introduce all in terms of who are these people and what they do. But here's their names. Imad al-Mubayyad, Omar al-Zahrani, Salama Abdul Qawi, Saeed al-Ghamdi, Fuad Kawthar, Abdullah Oda, Abdul Hayy Yusuf, Muhammad al-Didwaw, Nasir Awad al-Qarni, الشيخ محمد الصغير, وسعد الجابري. Now let me tell you, Abdullah Oda is the son of Salman Oda, who is in Saudi prisons. The famous religious scholar Salman Oda, his son is Abdullah Oda, a professor at George Washington here in the United States. Omar al-Zahrani is a Saudi activist, an intellectual, highly educated man in Canada that is an activist for democracy and civil rights and a critic of Saudi despotism. Sheikh Salama Abdul Qawi, as well as Sheikh Muhammad Saghir, although critics of despotism and autocracy in the Middle East, especially against the Egyptian government, not even the Saudi government. But the height of irresponsibility that the Saudi Arabian government, not just irresponsibility, this is the same government that had a famous journalist disappear in its embassy in Ankara. His body disintegrates and dilutes and never found. And no Saudi was held responsible. That same government that said, he vanished. No accountability. Don't you dare hold us accountable or responsible. Now tells us that you see those 1,300 pilgrims that died from heat stroke and thirst. We and you Muslims have no right to look at us as responsible or accountable anyway. In fact, who we are going to announce, why? Because we want it so. We are going to declare as accountable and responsible who? Anyone that criticizes us. either directly or indirectly, like Muhammad al-Saghir and so on. Like Al-Oda's son, Abdullah al-Oda. Like a critic of the Saudi government and a pro-democracy activist, al-Zahrani. We are going to say they are responsible for killing the pilgrims. Why? According to official Saudi sources, well, because they encourage people not to follow Saudi regulations and laws. A new standard and understanding of criminal accountability and liability. Now notice, the first dark-skinned man, although his DNA is not found, and also there is a bloody footprint that doesn't belong to him, is declared guilty and killed by a largely white jury. The dark-skinned man in Lebanon and Gaza is murdered at will. And you cannot hold Israel or the United States accountable or even have oversight. Why? Because they've declared the axis of evil and the axis of good and the axis of Abraham and the axis of Abrahamic Accords. Here, again, you have no right to a narrative of truth or a narrative of reality. Why? Because we said so. So, yes, the entire world watched these pilgrims die from heat and thirst. Who's responsible? It's who we say are responsible. A new understanding of criminal culpability. Because these people are critics of the Saudi government, they are responsible for the death of the pilgrims. No investigation, no fact-finding mission, no anything. It's what we say. What ailment does this point to? Despotism, autocracy. One final scene, the fourth. I mentioned before in my last khutbah, Aysenur Izgi, a Turkish woman, goes to Palestine protesting illegal settlements in Palestinian lands. She is shot in the head by a live bullet by Israelis. She is a U.S. citizen. She is a U.S. citizen, but of Turkish origin. And because she is of Turkish origin, the U.S. says, we trust Israel to investigate. We will ask Israel no questions. Her blood is spillable, like Williams in Missouri, like people in Gaza, like the people in Lebanon, like the pilgrims in Saudi. You don't have a right to ask any questions. You don't have a right to hold us accountable. You don't have a right for any type of investigation. She comes from the wrong ethnic background. And because she does, her country of citizenship will ask no questions. And because she does, no Muslim, if you are an Egyptian Muslim, if you're a Palestinian Muslim, if you're a Jordanian Muslim, if you're an Indonesian Muslim, if you are, has a right to advocate or defend her rights, because you Muslims don't have a right to solidarity. Again, the way that the colonizer defines what nationalism means to us and what racism means to us, and what indeed sectarianism means to us. Now, I said you read the present to make the future. And some of you might say, but wait. How is this helpful? Someone is executed. People are killed in mass in Lebanon and Gaza again. Pilgrims are killed in Saudi, and democratic advocates are blamed. A Turk is shot dead a Turkish US citizen is shot dead in Palestine by Israeli forces. Oh, don't you know we are helpless? You're just reminding us of our vulnerabilities. And I tell you, on the occasion of the first khutbah at the Usuli headquarters, that that's nonsense. Ask yourself, what is your responsibility in the face of reading this reality? What do you think God is going to ask of you? I can tell you, in my view, what God is going to ask you: have you become the best you could be? Have you truly excelled in serving those who speak and aiding and supporting those who speak the truth? Because if the Usuli voice is silenced, I want to ask you, where are you going to hear this truth? Where are you going to hear the voice that says, it is the fard, not kifaya, but fard ain. It is an individual obligation upon Muslims in the United States to gain power, and to be able to leverage that power to prevent our own government from executing the black man unfairly and unjustly, from affirming and furthering sectarianism in the Muslim world and allying itself with sectarian forces in the Muslim world, from preventing Muslims from developing a collective consciousness and moral awareness. The type of power that would deny Israel the 2,000-ton bomb. The type of power that would listen to Netanyahu and say, your axis of good and axis of evil and Abrahamic Accords is nonsense. The type of power that says, how dare you come to the UN when you've just made a decision to slaughter fellow Muslims without restraint or reserve. The type of power that says, no, we're not going to fund your genocide. And this brings us to the final ailment. Racism, sectarianism, nationalism, and the final ailment. And what might we call the final ailment? cowardism, miserliness, or miserliness. You cannot have that type of power without spending. It is an illogical impossibility. And don't expect authoritarian dictatorships like the Emirat and Saudi Arabia to do the spending. All of you Muslims out there that look to the Emirat and Saudi Arabia for money and funding, you're betraying the cause. It can only come from private individuals. But rich Muslims, truly rich Muslims, are cowards. They spend money where it's very safe. They spend money so Muslims can have conferences that are more like potlucks, that are more like dating games, where they come meet with each other, joke, laugh, share a bunch of rhetoric, and then all go home. On the occasion of the first khutbah at Usuli, I invite the rich Muslims out there who want to break with the disease of cowardliness and the disease of miserliness to support Usuli, to support this pulpit, to support this voice, to aid it, to make sure it is never silenced, and in fact, to make sure that it grows and spreads. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إني داع فأمنوا اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم اعف عنا اللهم ارحمنا يا رب العالمين اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا يا كريم يا رحمن يا رحيم. Allah, Ya Rabb, strengthen our iman. Allah, cure us of our ailments. Allah, do not allow us to ever be part of the demonic diseases of racism, sectarianism, nationalism, and cowardliness. Allah, give us the power to be brave, to be those who stand up for truth and testify for justice in your name, in your sake, for your sake. And, Ya Allah, make us agents of change, justice, and beauty. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وآله وأصحابه يا علي عظيم وأقم الصلاة.